Well, hello again, Social 30-1 students, the two or three that are watching this. But you know what? We're going to get through the next couple of challenges to democracies, and I'll do my best to explain some of these challenges as I try to explain the political systems that are within Canada and the United States. So we've covered the first two. That would be the whole idea of first past the post as a challenge and the whole idea of disenfranchised voters because of the system. So we're going to look at the third challenge. Once again, notice my sparkling Giphy 3. Well, the third one is party solidarity, meaning that your loyalty to the party in which you belong to is ultimately going to be tested and will have to be stronger than your loyalty to the constituents that elected you. And we'll see how that works here in a moment. And then we'll look at the last couple here, perhaps in this video or another one. All right, did you know there is no rule in Canada from someone switching political parties after being elected? This is known as crossing the floor. They are literally crossing the floor of the House of Commons from one side of the House of Commons to the next. Now, someone who's a real smart aleck will say, well, maybe if they're both on the one side, who knows? Yes, crossing the floor. This is a funny story. Paul Martin welcomes Belinda Stronach into the Liberal Party. Well, Belinda was running for the Conservative at the time. It was the United Conservative Party leadership. She was running against Stephen Harper. Okay. And at the time, she was dating another MP. Okay. And his name eludes him, even though he's running for the party right now. Anyhow, uh, she was dating this guy. She was running for the leadership of the Conservative Party. She lost to Stephen Harper. Stephen Harper was the opposition leader at the time. She was in his shadow cabinet. And just before the next election, I forget what year this was. Maybe it was about 2006, 2000. I forget. Paul Martin enticed her to cross the floor because Stephen Harper was a bit too conservative for what she believed in. She was what is considered a red Tory, more of a liberal conservative. And so she crossed the floor, became a liberal, and that is perfectly legal to do. A number of years ago in Alberta, just prior to the provincial election in which the NDP won, a number of, I think, uh, reform candidates or candidates from one party cross the floor to the conservatives, and so that happens. All right, here's another example. This time it's from the liberals to the conservatives. David Emerson crossed the floor, and from what I remember, it was not the reform, it was the Wild Rose Party, including I believe the leader, our own MLA, crossed the floor to the conservatives. So it can happen, and it happens quite a bit. So ultimately, the point I'm trying to make with this is that party solidarity a lot of times trumps your loyalty to your constituents. Okay, and you might think, well, that's not fair. It's just what happens. So the third challenge of democracies is representation of the people, so-called party solidarity. What's more important, your loyalty to your party or your loyalty to the people that ultimately elected you? Here's another example. This guy's name was David Kilgour. He voted against his own party in 1990 over placing GST into our system and was ultimately expelled from the Conservative caucus. Caucus is everybody that belongs to the same political party, belongs to this group. He was expelled from it. When you get expelled from a caucus, you have to sit as an independent. You lose party status, you lose party backing, and you sit kind of alone as an independent, kind of in shame, kind of in timeout. And when the next election runs around, they put another person in as the representative of that party, and more than likely you get beat. All right. So after this event in which he voted openly against the Conservative Party, he left. Well, he didn't. He got kicked out, and then eventually became a liberal and left that party as well. So once again, in our system, it's important to keep the confidence of the legislature or house, because if the government tries to pass a major bill, a legislation like a money bill, like a budget. Every year we try to pass a budget in our country. And if it ever gets defeated, the government has to resign by tradition, and usually a new election is called. Now, sometimes what happens, instead of election, they'll ask the minority opposition parties to form a coalition, and then they become the new government. But more than likely, there's a new election. This is called a vote of non confidence. That's an example of responsible government. If the executive ever loses the confidence of the legislative branch, they must resign and call an election. As a result of this serious consequence of defeat, it is important that a government's members, known as the party aforementioned caucus, votes with the party, the so called toe the party line. You have to do your part. You cannot speak out. It's just like a team. You can have your disagreements in party, in meetings, in private, but once you go outside of your room, you have to be a united front. And if you break that loyalty, then you pay. Once again, this is called party solidarity. There are severe penalties for those that vote against their party, including expulsion from the party. If we elect someone as our constituency representative, then who should they represent in parliament? And that is kind of an overarching question. Should they represent their party, or should they represent the people that elected them? So if there's an issue that's very important in that specific riding that they come from, but it goes against the wishes of the party in which they belong to, then we have what is known as a dilemma. All right. So that's the third issue. Like, really, if you think about it, in a true direct democracy, you would follow the wishes of the people. But because we have parties in our country and parties create stability, we have to follow and we have to be the good team member. Um, Sometimes going against the wishes, and see what happens if you ever go against the wishes of your constituents. The consequence of that is in the next election, you'll be voted out, or most likely voted out, etc. All right, let's move on to the fourth challenge to a democracy. And that fourth challenge is not elected representatives, now appointed. And you think about it, excuse me, if you have appointed representatives, you as a voter in a democracy did not have the choice to place that person in a position. They were instead appointed by either the prime minister or a certain bureaucracy, or in the United States' instance, the president, etc. So that kind of counters the whole idea of elected, responsible representatives. On the flip side, the thing about appointed is that sometimes you select people that are appropriate for that position, that they have been vetted, they have gone through a process in which people have looked at an application and said, okay, they are most qualified for this. Conversely, some would say that this might be a patronage appointment, where they've done something as far as political favors in the past, and now this is their just reward. All right, did you know Canadian citizens have no choice in part in selecting our head of state. Of course, our head of state, um, well, officially it's the monarch, and then they select the governor general. In the United States, the elected president is the head of state. That's a big difference between us and the United States. In Canada, of course, our head of state is the monarch. Did you know that revolutions in France and America created republics? And we mentioned what republics were. They rule by law, they rule by a constitution by eliminating the monarchy. Okay. Canada and Great Britain maintained their monarchy. We didn't have, well, Britain did have revolution like the 1640s, but then they retained the monarchy as a constitutional monarch. Canada, too, is a constitutional monarch. Our monarch is pigeonholed, it is curtailed by control. Okay. The monarch can't just come up and say, I want to execute these people or I want to do this and that. They have to abide by rules. And so many would argue that essentially they become a figurehead. Okay. You think about it, though, in principle, the whole idea of a monarchy contradicts liberalism, at least an absolute monarch. This, at this point, just becomes a figurehead. It becomes tradition. And tradition is stability. And that's one of the big reasons why we continue to have a monarch in our country, is for that stability, peace, so to speak. All right. A question you might want to think over yourself, or to yourself, or whatever. Should we keep the Queen and her representative, the Governor General, as our head of state? By the way, can you even name our Governor General right now? Think about arguments in favor of the monarchy and in favor of the Governor General, and then arguments against the monarchy and against the Governor General. And they're basically the same arguments. Arguments in favor would be stability. Arguments in favor would be tradition. Arguments in favor would be continued our close tie and relationship with Great Britain. Arguments against would be they cost too much money. Arguments against would be we could be putting our resources to other areas. Arguments against would be this is a bygone vestige of our past. We need to kind of move on. We need to break free from the control of Great Britain, or at least that tie to Great Britain. We are much more diverse and multicultural country. We need to kind of move beyond those historical ties. Here's another one. So we're now moving away from the Governor General, and now we're moving to another appointed representative, and that is the Senate. Did you know Liberal Senator, I think he passed away a few years ago, Andrew Thompson only sat in his Senate chamber 13 times in 8 years? Okay, that's probably a little bit better attendance than some of the kids I've taught over the years, but not much better. Okay, what I'm trying to get at with this is Andrew Thompson never showed up to the Senate to do his job, but yet still pocketed his salary every year. Okay, now what you see on the bottom here are a couple of, uh, I don't know, movie clips, mariachi bands. He The story behind it is that Andrew Thompson was suffering from some sort of skin ailment or some sort of, I think it was a cancer. He was living in Mexico for medicinal purposes. And so when he finally arrived back in Canada to sit in a Senate seat, he was derided, he was mocked, he was ridiculed by the Reform Party members at the time for showing up. And I think they brought in a Mexican mariachi band to try to poke fun at how ridiculous it was that he could only show up only a few times every year and still pocket the full salary of a senator. And now you know. All right. Like I said, the challenge of number four is that Canada's Senate is not elected. The Governor General ultimately appoints senators, but they're usually picked by the Prime Minister. Usually a Senate seat becomes open when the senator either retires or dies or something like that. And the prime minister historically picks people from his or her own party. Okay, so if it's currently a liberal prime minister, they'll select someone with a liberal background. A lot of people believe that the appointments to the Senate are kind of a retirement patronage like position. Patronage just means they're there. You've done a good job being a good, fill in the blank over the past fill in the blank years. So because of that, we're going to reward you with this posting. Okay. That is counter to democratic principles that you earn your position, you earn your way there. If you want to represent people, you have to be accountable to them. All right. If you notice here, the same thing is true for Supreme Court judges. They are not elected, but rather appointed under the selection of the PM. So, once again, the appointment of Senate, the appointment of the Supreme Court judges, there isn't the same oversight as there would be in the United States. For example, if Trump wants to nominate a judge, it has to be approved by the legislative branch. That doesn't have the same process in Canada. So, this certainly would be a challenge. Once again, just like I talked about with the governor general and the monarchy, this would be the same thing. Can you think of two arguments in support of keeping the Senate versus two arguments to abolish it? Two arguments of keeping the Senate would be, once again, stability. The people that are in the Senate are not elected, so they don't have to go by the whim of the mob, of the population. Okay, they don't always have to listen to what people have to say. Sometimes they voice the concerns of minority groups. So they're not worried about being reelected. Once again, the argument against the Senate would be the same arguments for the governor general. It's a bygone vestige of our history. It's not overly efficient. Essentially, for the most part, they just rubber stamp stuff that goes through the House of Commons, etc. And there's been lots of scandals over the last number of years, and it's been kind of embarrassing. And usually those scandals come up because they feel that there's no accountability. Senators, once again, are appointed by the PM. They're not traditional politicians. They don't have to be reelected. They represent minority groups of Canada. And one of the key coined terms of the Senate is that they are a position of sober second thought to the House of Commons. If things rashly get passed by the House of Commons, they're there to kind of check it. Here's a picture of the Senate. I love red more than green. I've always liked red more than green. That's like Myers versus Medicine Hat High or LCI. Green's kind of an ugly color. The American Senate, much smaller than the U.S. House of Representatives, but the same kind of design. Instead of 435 members, you only have 100 members. Instead of 2-year terms, they have 6-year terms. Here's the makeup of the U.S. Senate. This was a few years ago. Right now, I believe it is a Republican-held Senate. This is the latest one, in which there's slightly more Republicans than Democrats. So every 2 years, 1/3 of these senators come up for reelection. So 1 year would be 33, 2 years later would be another 33, and then 2 years later would be a 34, because of course that's 100. Okay, in Canada we have 105 senators. In the United States there are 100 senators, 2 per state. Each of the 4 main regions get 24 senators. The West, the Maritimes, Ontario, and Quebec. The North gets 3 senators, and Newfoundland and Labrador get 6. So, in some ways, they disproportionately represent the Atlantic provinces more than any other region. They serve until the age of 75, okay, and then they go into retirement. Well, that's better than Logan's Run. I mean, Logan's Run, the movie that was made in the 1970s, those guys lived in 19 or until they were 30, and then they were forced to, well, whatever. I'm on a tangent. I'm moving on. Okay, this is the process of a bill becoming a law. The same thing that happens in the Senate happens in the House of Commons. It goes through three readings. After the second reading, it goes through a committee and then an amendment, then a report stage. Third reading, it gets passed. Same process through the other house. Once it goes through both of those houses, it gets signed into law by the governor general. Problem with the Senate, however, since they have less accountability than the House of Commons, they are more susceptible for corruption. And what had been happening over the last 10 years is that senators get these expense accounts, etc. Similar to the other case study that I talked about, that if there isn't enough accountability or oversight, a lot of corruption can happen. If you're using taxpayers' money in order to pay for your self, then that can bring about corruption. And I'm not going to go into all these people, but all of them have had one scandal or another since they have become senators. And so the thinking is this: why do we have a Senate if all they're going to do is bring about embarrassment to our country? Feel free to look up what happened to Patrick Brazeau, Mike Duffy, Pamela Wallen, Mac Herb or Harb, etc. I'm just skipping ahead a few slides here. So we're going to move on to the last challenge to democracy, and that will be outside influences on government. And by the way, I do have to change that because now Tom Brady has 6 rings, not just 5. But the last challenge to democracy will be lobby groups, outside pressure groups, interest groups having disproportionate amount of control or influence on government. Look back to when I talked about crony capitalism and welfare corporatism, um, back a couple chapters ago, and apply that knowledge to what you're going to be exposed to now. All right, so a challenge, like I said, lobby groups are lobbyists, special interest groups, pressure groups. They all have different names. Some are more short term, some are longer term. And the problem with lobby groups is that if they are well organized, well funded, they can have a disproportionate amount of influence based on who they represent. So if they only represent maybe 5% of the population, but they have great organization, they have great leadership and all that, that they can influence government policy. Okay, so that's a challenge in democracy. Another challenge would be the role of media. The example I show here is MSNBC. Okay, Fox News, conversely, for more right wing way of thinking. You have Al Jazeera, etc. And so, when you're watching media, you have to ask yourself, what is the role of media? What are they trying to portray? Are they trying to present the news, or are they trying to frame the news? Who backs them? Who funds them? Who supports them? Okay. Are they really independent? And there's lots of interesting videos that I could show you. And over the next couple chapters, I think I'll present a couple things to have you look at. Another challenge would be financial donations from wealthy corporations or wealthy individuals and corporations. Of course, if you're going to get a lot of money as a politician from certain wealthy individuals and from certain multinational corporations, you might be influenced to act a certain way. Okay. Obviously, corporate welfare and crony capitalism, in which business marries with government, is going to disproportionately affect or influence government policy. And it's going to benefit the few at the expense of many. Okay. And once again, finally, highly motivated, highly organized, highly funded interest groups can represent a minority and ultimately have laws passed that favor them at the expense of the majority. All right, videos. You can watch them on your own. about lobby groups. They're more funny than informative. Jon Stewart, John Oliver, they talk about the gun lobby in the United States, and they use the kind of the backdrop of what happened in Australia as a comparison. Very well made, rather funny, etc. A very left wing way of thinking, though. Another challenge to democracy would be protesting. We see right now what's going on in the United States. Some would call it protesting, picketing, sit in, civil disobedience. Others would say it's becoming much more violent. You have violent groups like Antifa coming in and taking over, etc. And so protesting certainly can challenge democracy because if protesting turns violent, then the government, in order to survive, is forced to bring out more police, maybe more military, in order to suppress it. Couple videos that you could watch about Canadian elections. This one, like I said, is very comical in nature. So is this one. Comical in nature. I do warn you, anything with John Oliver, he's always referring to swearing. He's referring to, not overly appropriate content. Of course, it's on HBO, so fair warning. Okay, this video clip, I don't know if you have a link to this one, but this is a review of the election from 2015. This is the Williams Social video on democracy. Once again, feel free to watch that. And I think we're almost done, people. We're almost done. All those terms that I made you memorize in semesters past. Okay. We're not going over all those this year. Okay. But feel free to look them up, especially the last couple, filibuster and gerrymandering. Those are great words, by the way. Okay, more videos. These are all the Williams social videos. You could certainly watch these in order to get a better understanding of the political systems of Canada and the United States. I do a lot of redundancy here. Anyways, I think I'm about done. We're done chapter 10. All right, so as far as videos go, I got chapter 11 to do, and then I'll do a quick one for 13, 14, and then that's all she wrote, people. All right, take care. Carpe diem. I hope I get more than 3 views, but you know what? It's all good. It's all about love, people. Later.